Chapter 3. We do not worship God. We perceive and attend God. We learn from God. With forethought and work, we shape God. In the end, we yield to God. We adapt and endure, for we are Earthseed, and God is change. Earthseed, the Books of the Living. Tuesday, July 30th, 2024. One of the astronauts on the latest Mars mission has been killed. Something went wrong with her protective suit, and the rest of her team couldn't get her back to the shelter in time to save her. People here in the neighborhood are saying she had no business going to Mars anyway. All that money wasted on another crazy space trip, when so many people here on Earth can't afford water, food, or shelter. The cost of water has gone up again. And I heard on the news today that more water peddlers are being killed. Peddlers sell water to squatters and the street poor, and to people who've managed to hold on to their homes, but not to pay their utility bills. Peddlers are being found with their throats cut and their money and their hand trucks stolen. Dad says water now costs several times as much as gasoline. But except for arsonists and the rich, most people have given up buying gasoline. No one I know uses a gas-powered car, truck, or cycle. Vehicles like that are rusting in driveways and being cannibalized for metal and plastic. It's a lot harder to give up water. Fashion helps. You're supposed to be dirty now. If you're clean, you make a target of yourself. People think you're showing off, trying to be better than they are. Among the younger kids, being clean is a great way to start a fight. Corey won't let us stay dirty here in the neighborhood, but we all have filthy clothes to wear outside the walls. Even inside, my brothers throw dirt on themselves as soon as they get away from the house. It's better than getting beaten up all the time. Tonight, the last big window wall television in the neighborhood went dark for good. We saw the dead astronaut, with all of red, rocky Mars around her. We saw a dust-dry reservoir, and 3 dead water peddlers with their dirty blue armbands and their heads cut halfway off. And we saw whole blocks of boarded-up buildings burning in Los Angeles. Of course, no one would waste water trying to put such fires out. Then, the window went dark. The sound had flickered up and down for months, but the picture was always as promised, like looking through a vast open window. The Yanis family has made a business of having people in to look through their window. Dad says that kind of unlicensed business isn't legal, but he let us go to watch sometimes because he didn't see any harm in it, and it helped the Yanises. A lot of small businesses are illegal, even though they don't hurt anyone, and they keep a household or two alive. The Yanis window is about as old as I am. It covers the long west wall of their living room. They must have had plenty of money back when they bought it. For the past couple of years, though, they've been charging admission, only letting in people from the neighborhood, and selling fruit, fruit juice, acorn bread, or walnuts. Whatever they had too much of in their garden, they found a way to sell. They showed movies from their library, and let us watch news and whatever else was broadcast. They couldn't afford to subscribe to any of the new multisensory stuff, and their old window couldn't have received most of it anyway. They had no reality vests, no touch rings, and no headsets. Their setup was just a plain, thin-screened window. All we have left now are 3 small, ancient, murky little TV sets scattered around the neighborhood, a couple of computers used for work, and radios. Every household still has at least one working radio. A lot of our everyday news is from radio. I wonder what Mrs. Yanis will do now. Her 2 sisters have moved in with her, and they're working, so maybe it will be all right. One is a pharmacist, and the other is a nurse. They don't earn much, but Mrs. Yanis owns the house free and clear. It was her parents' house. All 3 sisters are widows, and between them they have 12 kids, all younger than I am. 2 years ago, Mr. Yanis, a dentist, was killed while riding his electric cycle home from the walled, guarded clinic where he worked. Mrs. Yanis says he was caught in a crossfire, hit from 2 directions, then shot once more at close range. His bike was stolen. The police investigated, collected their fee, and couldn't find a thing. People get killed like that all the time. Unless it happens in front of a police station, there are never any witnesses. Saturday, August 3rd, 2024. The dead astronaut is going to be brought back to Earth. She wanted to be buried on Mars. She said that when she realized she was dying. She said Mars was the only thing she had wanted all her life, and now she would be part of it forever. But the Secretary of Astronautics said no. He said her body might be a contaminant. Idiot. Can he believe that any microorganism living in or on her body would have a prayer of surviving and going native in that cold, thin, lethal ghost of an atmosphere? Maybe he can. Secretaries of Astronautics don't have to know much about science. They have to know about politics. Theirs is the youngest cabinet department, and already it's fighting for its life. Christopher Morpeth, Donner, one of the men running for president this year, has promised to abolish it if he's elected. My father agrees with Donner. Bread and circuses. My father says when there's space news on the radio, politicians and big corporations get the bread, and we get the circuses. Space could be our future, I say. I believe that. As far as I'm concerned, space exploration and colonization are among the few things left over from the last century that can help us more than they hurt us. It's hard to get anyone to see that, though, when there's so much suffering going on just outside our walls. Dad just looks at me and shakes his head. You don't understand, he says. You don't have any idea what a criminal waste of time and money that so-called space program is. He's going to vote for Donner. He's the only person I know who's going to vote at all. Most people have given up on politicians. After all, politicians have been promising to return us to the glory, wealth, and order of the 20th century ever since I can remember. That's what the space program is about these days, at least for politicians. Hey, We can run a space station, a station on the moon, and soon a colony on Mars. That proves we're still a great, forward-looking, powerful nation, right? Yeah. Well, we're barely a nation at all anymore, but I'm glad we're still in space. We have to be going someplace other than down the toilet. And I'm sorry that astronaut will be brought back from her own chosen heaven. Her name was Alicia Catalina Godinez Leal. She was a chemist. I intend to remember her. I think she can be a kind of model for me. She spent her life heading for Mars, preparing herself, becoming an astronaut, getting on a Mars crew, going to Mars, beginning to figure out how to terraform Mars, beginning to create sheltered places where people can live and work now. Mars is a rock, cold, empty, almost airless, dead. Yet it's heaven in a way. We can see it in the night sky, a whole other world, but too nearby, too close within the reach of the people who've made such a hell of life here on Earth. Monday, August 12th, 2024. Mrs. Sims shot herself today, or rather, she shot herself a few days ago, and Corey and Dad found her today. Corey went a little crazy for a while afterward. Poor sanctimonious old Mrs. Sims. She used to sit in our front room church every Sunday, large print Bible in hand, and shout out her responses. Yes, Lord. Hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. During the rest of the week, she sewed, made baskets, took care of her garden, sold what she could from it, took care of preschool children, and talked about everyone who wasn't as holy as she thought she was. She was the only person I've ever known who lived alone. She had a whole big house to herself because she and the wife of her only son hated each other. Her son and his family were poor, but they wouldn't live with her. Too bad. Different people frightened her in some deep, hard, ugly way. She didn't like the Sioux family because they were Chinese and Hispanic, and the older Chinese generation is still Buddhist. She's lived a couple of doors up from them for longer than I've been alive, but they were still from Saturn as far as she was concerned. Idolaters, she would call them if none of them were around. At least she cared enough about neighborly relations to do her talking about them behind their backs. They brought her peaches and figs and a length of good cotton cloth last month when she was robbed. That robbery was Mrs. Sims' first major tragedy. 3 men climbed over the neighborhood wall, cutting through the strands of barbed wire and laser wire on top. Laser wire is terrible stuff. It's so fine and sharp that it slices into the wings or feet of birds who either don't see it or see it and try to settle on it. People, though, can always find a way over, under, or through. Everyone brought Mrs. Sims things after the robbery, in spite of the way she is. Was. Food, clothing, money. We took up collections for her at church. The thieves had tied her up and left her after one of them raped her, an old lady like that. They grabbed all her food, her jewelry that had once belonged to her mother, her clothes, and worst of all, her supply of cash. It turns out she kept that, all of it, in a blue plastic mixing bowl high up in her kitchen cabinet. Poor crazy old lady. She came to my father, crying and carrying on after the robbery because now she couldn't buy the extra food she needed to supplement what she grew. She couldn't pay her utility bills or her upcoming property taxes. She would be thrown out of her house into the street. She would starve. Dad told her over and over that the church would never let that happen, but she didn't believe him. She talked on and on about having to be a beggar now, while Dad and Corey tried to reassure her. The funny thing is, she didn't like us either, because Dad had gone and married that Mexican woman, Corey Azan. It just isn't that hard to say, Corazon, if that's what you choose to call her. Most people just call her Corey, or Mrs. Olamina. Corey never let on that she was offended. She and Mrs. Sims were sugary sweet to one another. A little more hypocrisy to keep the peace. Last week, Mrs. Sims's son, his 5 kids, his wife, her brother, and her brother's 3 kids all died in a house fire, an arson fire. The son's house had been in an unwalled area, north and east of us, closer to the foothills. It wasn't a bad area, but it was poor, naked. One night, someone torched the house. Maybe it was a vengeance fire set by some enemy of a family member, or maybe some crazy just set it for fun. I've heard there's a new illegal drug that makes people want to set fires. Anyway, no one knows who did it to the Sims Boyer families. No one saw anything, of course. And no one got out of the house. Odd, that. 11 people, and no one got out. So, about 3 days ago, Mrs. Sims shot herself. Dad said he'd heard from the cops that it was about 3 days ago. That would have been just 2 days after she heard about her son's death. Dad went to see her this morning because she missed church yesterday. Corey forced herself to go along because she thought she should. I wish she hadn't. To me, dead bodies are disgusting. They stink, and if they're old enough, they're maggots. But what the hell, they're dead. They aren't suffering. And if you didn't like them when they were alive, why get so upset about their being dead? Corey gets upset. She jumps on me for sharing pain with the living, but she tries to share it with the dead. I began writing this about Mrs. Sims because she killed herself. That's what's upset me. She believed, like Dad, that if you kill yourself, you go to hell and burn forever. She believed in a literal acceptance of everything in the Bible. Yet, when things got to be too much for her, she decided to trade pain now for eternal pain in the hereafter. How could she do that? Did she really believe in anything at all? Was it all hypocrisy? Or maybe she just went crazy because her God was demanding too much of her. She was no Job. In real life, how many people are? Saturday, August 17th, 2024. I can't get Mrs. Sims out of my mind. Somehow, she and her suicide have gotten tangled up with the astronaut and her death and her expulsion from heaven. I need to write about what I believe. I need to begin to put together the scattered verses that I've been writing about God since I was 12. Most of them aren't much good. They say what I need to say, but they don't say it very well. A few are the way they should be. They press on me, too, like the two deaths. I tried to hide in all the work there is to do here for the household, for my father's church, and for the school Corey keeps to teach the neighborhood kids. The truth is, I don't care about any of those things. But they keep me busy and make me tired, and most of the time, I sleep without dreaming. And Dad beams when people tell him how smart and industrious I am. I love him. He's the best person I know, and I care what he thinks. I wish I didn't, but I do. For what it's worth, here's what I believe. It took me a lot of time to understand it, then a lot more time with the dictionary and a thesaurus to say it just right, just the way it has to be. In the past year, it's gone through 25 or 30 lumpy, incoherent rewrites. This is the right one, the true one. This is the one I keep coming back to. God is power, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent. And yet, God is pliable, trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God exists to be shaped. God is change. This is the literal truth. God can't be resisted or stopped, but can be shaped and focused. This means God is not to be prayed to. Prayers only help the person doing the praying, and then only if they strengthen and focus that person's resolve. If they're used that way, they can help us in our only real relationship with God. They help us to shape God and to accept and work with the shapes that God imposes on us. God is power, and in the end, God prevails. But we can rig the game in our own favor if we understand that God exists to be shaped and will be shaped with or without our forethought, with or without our intent. That's what I know. That's some of it anyway. I'm not like Mrs. Sims. I'm not some kind of potential Job, long-suffering, stiff-necked, then, at last, either humble before an all-knowing Almighty or destroyed. My God doesn't love me or hate me or watch over me or know me at all. And I feel no love for or loyalty to my God. My God just is. Maybe I'll be more like Alicia Leal, the astronaut. Like her, I believe in something that I think my dying, denying, backward-looking people need. I don't have all of it yet. I don't even know how to pass on what I do have. I've got to learn to do that. It scares me how many things I've got to learn. How will I learn them? Is any of this real? Dangerous questions. Sometimes I don't know the answer. I doubt myself. I doubt what I think I know. I try to forget about it. After all, if it's real, why doesn't anyone else know about it? Everyone knows that change is inevitable. From the second law of thermodynamics to Darwinian evolution, from Buddhism's insistence that nothing is permanent and all suffering results from our delusions of permanence, to the third chapter of Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season. Change is part of life, of existence, of the common wisdom. But I don't believe we're dealing with all that means. We haven't even begun to deal with it. We give lip service to acceptance, as though acceptance were enough. Then we go on to create super people, super parents, super kings and queens, super cops to be our gods and to look after us, to stand between us and God. Yet God has been here all along, shaping us and being shaped by us in no particular way, or in too many ways at once, like an amoeba, or like a cancer. Chaos. Even so, why can't I do what others have done? Ignore the obvious. Live a normal life. It's hard enough just to do that in this world. But this thing, this idea, philosophy, new religion won't let me alone, won't let me forget it, won't let me go. Maybe it's like my sharing. One more weirdness, one more crazy, deep-rooted delusion that I'm stuck with. I am stuck with it. And in time, I'll have to do something about it. In spite of what my father will say or do to me, in spite of the poisonous rottenness outside the wall where I might be exiled, I have to do something about it. That reality scares me to death. Wednesday, November 6th, 2024. President William Turner Smith lost yesterday's elections. Christopher Charles Morpeth Donner is our new president-elect. So, what are we in for? Donner has already said that as soon as possible after his inauguration next year, he'll begin to dismantle the wasteful, pointless, unnecessary Moon and Mars programs. Near-space programs dealing with communications and experimentation will be privatized, sold off. Also, Donner has a plan for putting people back to work. He hopes to get laws changed, suspend overly restrictive minimum wage, environmental, and worker protection laws for those employers willing to take on homeless employees and provide them with training and adequate room and board. What's adequate, I wonder? A house or apartment? A room? A bed in a shared room? A barracks bed? Space on a floor? Space on the ground? And what about people with big families? Won't they be seen as bad investments? Won't it make much more sense for companies to hire single people, childless couples, or at most, people with only 1 or 2 kids? I wonder. And what about those suspended laws? Will it be legal to poison, mutilate, or infect people, as long as you provide them with food, water, and a space to die? Dad decided not to vote for Donner after all. He didn't vote for anyone. He said politicians turned his stomach.